So I first want to start by saying, I've chosen this title, Mami Wata, and really focusing on the burden of the quest. And as I think about the body of work that I've done over the past 20 years and more recently in the past 8 years, I really think of Mami Wata as this spirit that I've often seen in many places depicted and venerated in West Africa, Central, Southern Africa, and also in the African diaspora in the Americas. She's a symbol of strength and resilience and supernatural power. A female spirit, in most scholarly sources, suggests that the name Mami Wata is Pidgin English, a derivation of mother water, reflecting the goddess title, Mother of Water, Grandmother of Water, in Agni language of Côte d'Ivoire. And so as I reflected on this project that I've been working on, I really wanted to think about what is it that embodies sort of the spirit of women and their quest and the role that they play in this process of water. We also then have to really think about the connection and framing these issues. I'm going to try to fix this because we have a little technical issue here. So hold on, and let me just start again. So in framing the issue, there are many complex issues we should discuss when we think about water. And I really try to bring this to light because oftentimes we think about the global water crisis just sort of about access. But in fact, it's a very dynamic and complex issue. We actually begin to think about the connection between whether water is hurting us, whether it's clean enough, whether there's enough for all uses, too much or too little. And so before we can begin to really talk about the connection of women in water, it's important to understand these complex dynamics. We also then think about this issue of equity. Who is receiving, how it is conveyed. Also, though, is it hurting species? Do we have enough data? Do we have too much water? With the case of climate change, we often see a moving target with regard to water issues. The gist, though, the very basic problem at hand is this access issue. Coming out of the Millennium Development Goals and into the Sustainable Development Goals, we're still challenged with the fact that nearly 700 million people still live without access to an improved drinking water supply. And when I say improved sources generally include sources that by nature of their construction or through active intervention are protected from outside contamination, particularly fecal matter. And so it includes things like piped water in a dwelling, which is sort of the gold standard. But in fact, in most cases, an improved water supply will be aligned well, aligned borehole, some sort of standpipe that is shared within a community. And we typically think about access issues of 30 minutes away or less for a round trip journey. So an improved supply would incorporate those characteristics. The other side of this, though, complicates the issue so much, and we never actually talk about this. It's rather taboo. We don't actually talk about the fact that the very same communities who are challenged by the access to water issue are also challenged by the access to proper and dignified sanitation and hygiene. People don't like to think about the fact that when we talk about the global water crisis, we have to also add hygiene and sanitation to the discussion. And so it's not pretty, but the reality is 1 billion people still practice open defecation around the world. And 2.4 billion people worldwide still don't have access to improved sanitation. And when we talk about improved sanitation, we're thinking about bringing people up the sanitation ladder from open defecation to some sort of improved latrine or even a flush toilet. So the fact that 1 billion people in the world still practice open defecation and that there's a need for improved and dignified sanitation, a simple improved latrine, is really shocking when people think about this crisis. And unfortunately, There's not a lot of donor money or support because people don't like to think about it. Also, when we think about overlaying then the need, right? The access to water need coupled with the access to sanitation, it actually overlays, it really mirrors itself. There are about 46 countries where less than half of the population has access to both improved water and sanitation facilities. It's really a very complex challenge, and more so when we think about population and distribution. So 82% of the billion people practicing open defecation are actually living in 10 countries in the world, with India being highest on the list with nearly 600 million people still practicing with undignified sanitation. This is quite complex and shocking. And so before thinking about then the implications and the burden on women, it's important to understand the bigger picture. So the last thing, the last snapshot that's important is, as we overlay all of this, if we think about then healthcare facilities in the same regions also are not equipped with proper hygiene and sanitation. WHO, about 3 or 4 years ago, did a pretty comprehensive study and looked at the fact that, in fact, when you think about the levels of service needed to address the environmental burden of disease in these regions, both in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, that hospitals are not equipped primarily due to the sanitation and hygiene and water issues. These complex issues also emerge relative to thinking about then inequity, gender, and how services are distributed. The nexus between water, food, and energy, because water really is life. It is the life of a community. And urban issues, urbanization being one of the biggest global health challenges of our time, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, where in the next 25 years, urban centers will double in size. So as we think about these solutions, how do we get in front of the challenges? And then an area that is really dear to my heart, really constantly thinking about connecting these disciplines of public health, medicine, engineering, water, because we know that it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. We know we also need social and behavioral sciences, for example. So this is further complicated again, and most recently we've seen with the storm in Mozambique how climate change can impact this as well. So back to the discussion at hand about women. We know that women really play a nurturing role and the health of the family. And when you think about then health issues and a critical health issue, according to the UN, every 20 seconds, someone in the world will die from a water-related problem. And we know that, in fact, the under fives, and according to UNICEF, so children under 5 and the mothers who care for those children are often burdened with the fact that nearly 728,000 deaths per year are attributed to diarrhea, which kills more children under 5 than HIV, AIDS, malaria, and measles combined. It's actually quite disturbing to see the number of women who are in and out of health centers and clinics dealing with chronic diarrheal disease in their young infants. And you'll hear a little bit more of stories along the way where time after time, again, as I did this work in the field, I began to see that, in fact, this was one of the biggest implications, this impact on children and the burden that women have in really thinking about that and addressing it. So this issue is twofold, very complex. We hear much about the global water crisis and access issues, but rarely hear about the nexus between water, sanitation, and hygiene, how it's related to health, and the need to move people up the sanitation ladder. We can't address water without dealing with the hygiene issues. And finally, when I think about sanitation, I sometimes often am very technical in my mind, so I thought, there's ways to depict this very easily for folks who want to understand what this means. When we're talking about the sanitation ladder, we truly are meaning bringing people from sort of that 1 billion depicted at the bottom to some sort of unimproved facility, but ultimately even a shared facility, shared toilets, and also then a latrine or a toilet per compound. And this, later you'll hear, has a lot of implications for women and safety and health. So the global water and sanitation crisis is complex and has implications that are far-reaching in relation to dignity, culture, and the need for behavior change, health impacts, and poverty. And with that as a backdrop, we do know then that women and young girls are impacted the most. So as I began working in the field nearly 20 years ago, and most recently in a partnership with major NGOs working on this issue for the past 8 years, I've run across the same scenario time and time again. Like this one in the village of Khartoum in the Gambia in West Africa, where Binta, Fatu, and Mariama go about their daily life from sunup to sundown, focused on this quest. The quest to fetch water several times a day at distances up to 45 minutes, even an hour and a half. If you think about the fact that the typical container weighs nearly 40 pounds, as much as a 5-year-old, and that even at times women carry maybe barrels of water that can weigh up to 70 pounds. And when you think about the fact that this morning you got up and you prepared yourself, you took a shower as long as you needed to, you flushed as many times as you needed to, these young women are actually making concessions for the use of water based on their ability to carry it and to fetch it. They have to plan their day around this activity. They have to decide how much to use for cooking and bathing, for laundry, etc. Coupled then as a backdrop, given the data I presented, we also note that in many, many places in the world, these same women are challenged with just the basic task of easing themselves. We see headlines all the time in places like India and also in Africa, where women and young girls have been assaulted simply for the act of finding a dignified place to go. And so the opportunity to have a simple latrine in the household is paramount for safety and security. There have been many atrocities carried out. This happens to be a headline from India, but there are many, many, many examples of this. And these scenarios, which I've seen time and time again in the field, become even more complicated when you consider some women are even disabled or pregnant and still burdened with this quest daily. Like the women I met in northern Zambia, Nancy and Fiona. Nancy was physically disabled, and she also cared for her disabled son, who was deaf. She made accommodations for her quest, and Nancy is there on the left. And she came up with a way to carry a smaller, lighter jerry can, one that could be tied to her back like a backpack, while she carried the other in her hand. And slowly and surely, she made the journey. This meant she had to take multiple trips because she collected less water, and sometimes her legs would be too weak for the second or third journey. So she made some tough decisions about how she used water sparingly in her household. There was not enough to bathe daily at times. Sometimes she couldn't wash clothes. She wanted to have enough to cook and to drink for her son because she wanted to make sure he remained healthy and as comfortable as possible. You can imagine in a very rural area, it was hard to find services for him as well. And the story of Fiona, who told me about her quest. But I saw it for myself. I saw it with my own eyes. She told me about seeing a child drown in an open dugout well in her village, about snake bites, and how she herself fell in and was stuck while pregnant. We'll learn more about what happened in Fiona's village, but just seeing that hopefully leaves an impression on you and thinking about what you did this morning to access water in your life. So now I want to show a little story about Naomi, a Maasai woman, and these some of these clips I'm sharing are from the partnership we have with World Vision and UNICEF that really depict some of the challenges with the global water crisis. And for those of you who don't have a background in this area, I think it's quite interesting to see these narratives.
Kajiranga Naomi Nalgai. Nagara ngiro kala Masai, nara ngera uni, nara singa nahara. Ari shebe nari tangara ginara ngiro kala Masai. Ora ba maisha ilege bola bole. Nganyoro wede ganya nalo endama msima. Rage daba soiro agira ogwankare. Akara bengure lishu agira adogi oltoko ogwankare. Arakumok intungana arusulakino lolosoro. Akaya ba sai nabishana engolo msima agira ogwankare. Ola banare nemenye ruseseni lande niyo gaba niyimoyo. Agara bachafu amara ba enkare nesudare. Oye tangara yimiki araba enkare nebisha ora bashorishu ayo albajala niyo kula bole.
So Naomi's story is similar to the story of Mary and similar to many of the women and young girls we've seen over the years. And it really motivates me to do this work. I met this young girl along the border, Mary. I happened to be actually detained between Malawi and Mozambique without a visa, and during the process of sitting there overnight, as I woke up in the morning, Mary was walking along her way at the crack of dawn, making her way along the border to fetch water twice before going to school. And again, she had improvised. She had attempted to make the process more efficient by tying 2 jerry cans to her back, 2 cans at 40 pounds. Imagine that, this small girl making her quest under these harsh conditions. And when I talked to her, I asked her, how does she do it all by herself? And she said she had been prepared by her mother and her grandmother, Mami Wata. This was part of her daily life, and that she was fortunate to be strong enough to make the 2 trips in the morning, a total time of nearly 1.5 hours of walking, so that she could have 4 jerry cans filled for her mother to use for laundry, cooking, cleaning, and horticulture, for the garden that they had started. She was excited about this garden, and she knew that the water was needed to sustain it, so it was worth it for her. It was worth it for her. And so it was a joy to meet her, and it's a joy to really see all the young girls time and time again. This is in Burundi, early morning hours before school. And so this vignette I want to share, it was really what motivated me to think about then how can we raise awareness and really talk about the interventions we are doing and how many people need to be engaged. There was Amida from Tanzania. And as beautiful as she is, looking pensive, I have to say this day was very emotional for me. She told me about how she had lost 3 of her infant children over a 10-year period to diarrheal disease, how life was sometimes viewed as hopeless in her community when there was no water. And when there was no water, there was also limited food. She talked about how her husband even beat her and eventually divorced her because he did not believe that it was taking her 3 and 4 hours a day to go and find and fetch water. He was in disbelief and did not believe her. So the trajectory of her life had been severely impacted by this burden. Amida's story and the strength she displayed in telling it shook me to my core. It's driven me to stay committed to addressing the global water and sanitation crisis and the burden of the quest, and really solving problems like Fiona's that I showed you. These two things have left the biggest impression on me in this work. And so as the last 8 years have passed, I've collaborated with the largest NGO provider of water and sanitation in the developing world, World Vision, to address the global water and sanitation crisis, and specifically focusing on Sustainable Development Goal 6, which really talks about ensuring universal access to water and sanitation for all. And this has been a monumental effort. As you can see, there are many, many partners engaged in this effort. And these are just a few of the key partners. One thing I'm excited about is, now that I have this role at Columbia, how we can be engaged with Columbia. And that really relates to some of the things I did at Drexel, creating opportunities for the next generation of leaders to work in the field on these types of projects, but also to think about the innovation that can be generated as we think about simple solutions, low-cost solutions. So when we think about then this work, it really is at the nexus of many, many areas. It crosses sectors, and the Sustainable Development Goals, we think about not just Goal 6, but also gender equity, education, health, economic development, and reducing inequalities. All of these things are at the nexus of this water and sanitation issue, as you'll see. There are some big goals by 2030 that we've aligned this work with. And there's been lots of progress made to date in just a very short amount of time, and we'll talk about that. One thing has been this focus in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, I just came to Paris from Senegal, where we were working on capacity building, engaging women and others in the field on how to really address the hygiene and behavior change aspects. Other aspects of the partnership have really yielded some great results, including many, many people who've had improved access to water and sanitation. And again, the software is what we call hygiene. So behavior change initiatives that really think about what are the barriers toward improving hygiene behaviors and how we might enable and create enabling environments to do so. How we've been doing this work then has focused on an approach that systematically seems to work well, engaging the community and thinking about need. One thing that's very different than maybe how others have approached this water and sanitation challenge is that, in fact, before addressing water, one has to have some open, community-based dialogue about sanitation and hygiene. And across certain cultures, that can be a very, very difficult conversation. And so engaging the community to think about how they might tackle this challenge, with the understanding that one cannot tackle the access to water issue without dealing with that. Creating opportunities for communities to identify the needs and brainstorms, and creating a water committee, including gender mainstreaming on that community. And coming up on that committee and coming up with appropriate fee structures for a source of clean water when we engage and assess and train hygiene coordinators and sanitation coordinators to also help deliver messages around best practices and behaviors. This might also include building demonstration latrine facilities in schools and health centers, both to support the community and to show the community what a good sanitation facility and standard could look like using local materials. So it's been exciting to see this work grow. I personally have worked in all the blue areas and actually the red areas in Africa, and we've expanded. This partnership is now really, really engaged in all of the blue and the red. Donor support was received in about 36 countries, and that also was split between not just actual projects in the field, but the capacity building. And the biggest impacts that have moved the needle in addressing health have been related to improving hygiene and addressing behavior change. Simple solutions like hand washing with soap have saved lives. This is a Tippy Tap, a low-cost hand washing station operated by a foot pedal, and there's a small container of soap there as well. And so the messaging around before addressing solutions for water, focusing on hygiene and sanitation has been very consistent and has had a particular impact on the health of families and empowering women to take a lead in addressing this in the community and the family as a priority. The other thing that's been interesting and exciting to see is how doing these interventions in schools, school hygiene clubs like this one in the mountains of Mexico in an indigenous community, also provides an opportunity to address the behavior change and promote a clean environment. These children are officers of the hygiene club responsible for cleaning the school compound and maintaining the hand washing facilities. And they have to learn to operate and check the maintenance of the well nearby as well. And the messages that they learn in school are actually also transmitted to their families. There's inquiry, there's further understanding of how important this is in the community. Hygiene clubs in schools can also include mothers. Here in this preschool in a rural Indian village, I met women who were in care groups for weekly discussions about health and hygiene, and even about how they could create savings groups and other clubs to fund many of the improvements they wish to have. And so beyond access, we also focused on promising solutions, everything from looking at community-based solutions like community-led total sanitation, which I'll show you an example of, but also low-cost improvements in hardware, like how do we shift the focus from the actual standpipe or the well to the point of use? And then thinking about the health impact focus in some of the social and behavioral contexts, like designing for behavior change. And then finally, sustainability having to be inclusive of capacity building. So that includes training. How do we make this sustainable? How do we make the maintenance sustainable? So community-led total sanitation has been a very interesting concept, first used in India and other parts of Southeast Asia, and more recently in Africa, where communities are triggered to begin to think about how to address hygiene and sanitation, literally mapping out open defecation areas, like talking to each other and realizing, oh my gosh, you're going like where I garden. This is my favorite spot to sit. But that sort of really shocking conversation actually triggers the community to do something, take the bull by the horns and solve the problem. So the elders begin to be engaged, the women begin to be engaged, and suddenly we see communities quickly moving up the sanitation ladder, thinking about how they could create sanitation marketing strategies and create local artisans who use local materials. And although there's a lot of data and literature showing that, these locally made latrines fail because of poor design or materials, but it still raises a consciousness of the community to understand that sanitation and hygiene must be a priority. The focus on WASH in schools has been primarily to address these very dismal statistics. So coming out of the MDGs into the SDGs, there was still this issue of nearly half of the schools in sub-Saharan Africa not having access to adequate sources, of course sanitation facilities also mirroring that. So WASH in schools has been a very energizing and active way to improve these scenarios. There you see in the bottom a hand washing station in a school in Lesotho that I visited, where they simply really came up again with a way for the hygiene club to maintain a very simple solution, which was a hose hooked to a tank, and they had a very, very clear song and regimen around how they wash hands, and it was really fascinating to see and to really understand what works, right, in the context. But WASH in schools has also really incorporated working side by side with government, coming up with policies and standards to adapt the toilet facilities and other facilities to make sure it's inclusive for menstrual hygiene management, for example, but also inclusive designs for disabled children. When we think about the impact that WASH can have on education, it's actually quite shocking to realize that when 88% of diarrheal disease is contributed to WASH, we know that this is reducing absenteeism when we address this issue. We also know that chronic malnutrition rates are related to poor water and sanitation and hygiene, and viral enteropathy and the gut hygiene of just chronically being exposed to fecal matter has an impact on malnutrition rates. And food security and also enabling parents to better really care for their children all relate to how these WASH interventions in schools really have improvements on overall child well-being. So WASH transforms communities. And when I say WASH, I'm talking about the whole holistic part of this, water, sanitation, and hygiene. And so when you think about Fiona's community in northern Zambia, there's also a community there in Swaziland, the discussion really is the same. The outcome and what happens once we have a scenario like this, so this is in Fiona's village, which for 60 years, they fetched water in the way that was depicted in that video, and last year received a borehole that provided a distribution system, cut down the distance. It was a hygienic, lined well. It was mechanized with solar power. There was a fee structure rolled out for the community to save and work on the maintenance, as well as a capacity building strategy to train individuals to work on it. This makes a difference. Also, menstrual hygiene management, thinking about not just in the school setting, but in communities. And how do we address the taboo associated and the issue associated along the lines of gender? And so really empowering young boys in schools and communities to understand that the more that they can really work on creating menstrual hygiene materials that can be done with local materials, how they can be distributed in the community, the role they can play really improves situations and conditions for their sisters and their mothers, and you have a healthier community. So it removes sort of the taboo. It actually is quite fascinating to see how in other cultures we manage to be able to do this quite well, and there's a lot we can learn about it as well. So time and time again, and these are menstrual hygiene campaigns in Malawi and Mozambique and Zambia and Zimbabwe, where I've even taken my children, thinking about how to empower the community to not only address the taboo and even have the knowledge to understand, how this relates to well-being, but also coming up with small micro enterprises that actually can provide sustainable solutions and source and supplies for the community, even in India. So water means opportunity. Right? Once we address the sanitation issue, we actually improve and cut down the distance for access to water. Once we start moving the needle on this work, it was amazing to see the transformation of communities. I met Brenda in Kenya. She was so proud to have started a commercial farm. She was employing others in her village to work the land. When the water came to her village, her entire life changed. She was able to support her family and have a livelihood. They were healthier. She was able to help her parents as well. She was so proud to show me the cart she has purchased that allowed her to bring more and more water to her household. She had like several containers sitting around where we actually had to deal with other hygiene issues because of the water containers sitting around. But it was just fascinating to see how, in fact, in this short amount of time, she actually created an economy, a business for herself, and she was also able to help others. And in Burundi, where this elderly woman celebrated the fact that her distance to water was cut down to 5 minutes, she carried small containers now and was really proud to show that. More tippy taps and good hygiene, more empowerment of women to take control and address these with very low cost solutions. And they're solutions that government can partner on. They're doable actions. And thinking about the transformation, the impact it has on health. This is a small healthcare facility where midwives in the Gambia spend a lot of time delivering babies, sometimes by candlelight. But when water was available, the hygiene could be maintained. They were really very confident about their duties. It was also more comfortable for the women in labor. Improved wash in healthcare, improved access on a tea plantation in Sri Lanka, where these women were so proud to have toilets in their household. These were actually flush toilets, which, in fact, when you think about the technology today and the innovations, the cost has gone down tremendously. And so it was really very exciting to see how they had created a marketing strategy to build flush toilets in this community in Sri Lanka. And here in Kenya, again, where women had started a business making trapezoidal bricks to build latrines. So with the improved access to water and some training, they had created a sanitation marketing scheme where now helping other communities to build improved latrines to make sure that they didn't collapse. They had come up with a way to build these trapezoidal bricks that stayed in place, and they were stronger. And what was also fascinating about this particular group is that it was multi-generational. This was an older woman who was sort of leading the group of younger women and training them how to do this. So the implications, the children are healthier and happier, and even the elders are pleased about the new opportunities, like new opportunities for their daughters and their granddaughters, now that they have access to water and improved hygiene and sanitation. Like this indigenous woman in the mountains of Mexico who is just so beautiful. So I want to show this next clip because I really think it summarizes how water can transform a community. And this was shot in Malawi, again, through the partnership, but I think it really epitomizes the point.
What is a woman to do when she has no water? When she has children to raise, often alone, who constantly get ill, and there is always a struggle to provide enough food to feed her family. This is a story of transformation. Without water, you cannot have development. It is tied to life, to health, to livelihoods. This is a story of how World Vision brought water to DK Village in Malawi and how it transformed the lives of all those living there.
Lazima ndivangisa hivi vimile vande ikati kwene na kuzima siku anu ya banja amango kala yorani baza sana bwele ndibankala musoma azevangi gani fuga mazi mote utulezi kumbua mupinyi nasi ndilona mugomu wantu wena bana urazango ndindiwe kuja kumba ndeyina nabiru gwalabu kugobora ndalama kalaba abantu ngovo kugobora ndalama kalabole za kugule yani kubaita kwera nabwera ndagula February ndaga banga gani zena bado ndenta bila banga gani bonde mine ndakugule na ubagani ndio ndenta gani zori leso ndirani ndio makaso ndio mtazanga ndio na gari wanga za mapamba wano ndeni wale kutuma pamba ndamina marisalizia to kumadenda ni kisama dole madendo sana siani enda benenge ndini zavala sandu maja bila wala kusaba mimi niende mimi ndinasangandisho wala nitafuna kubajipaka tibu kwa samba kabisa kadhaa ina bulisa la yamazo ina kuzenza ndizoya na kufuda bila kuvala nao.
Water is life, but to these women, water means opportunity. It's a way for women to build a business, support their families, realize their dreams, and experience life in all its fullness. When women are empowered and strengthened, the world gets stronger.
ndino mama ziwo ndakula ndi marin kasamba ndipeza mphamvu zine kanti pitira kumunta ndakuti kanti ndipeka mageni ndakuti ndipeza mphamvu kufuka ntakawo ndiba mphamvu geni sindingapitayi because then hasa ndimati tibidela fuka koma ndimakhala ndi mphamvu kuti ndasamba ndimapita kumageniko.
So that really sums it up. I think it's just great to really see that connection, how water is at the nexus of livelihood for communities, and women are at the core of that. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the contributions made to this collective effort, this huge partnership, and the impacts it has had in moving the needle. Our dear friends and benefactors, David and Dana Dornsife, who have contributed over $100 million to this effort and major gifts to various members of the partnership. And in fact, at Drexel University, where I was Vice Provost for International Development and Director of the Global Health Program, we received a major gift of $45 million, which enabled me to really develop a global engagement program. And so now I'm putting my dean hat on because I had a chance to really connect this to opportunities for students to work in the field on these global challenges from 3 to 6 months at the nexus of issues related to water, sanitation, health, livelihoods, education, women's development, health, child protection, side by side with NGOs and partners on this important work. And the focus areas were vast, ranging from microenterprise and entrepreneurship to disability and inclusion to food security and privatization to community-based approaches, maternal and child health, engineering. It's all there. And it was also really through this gift that we were able to think about then building capacity to create more sustainable solutions that had a women's perspective, the lens of women. All of that I've worked on over the last 8 to 10 years, what I'm most proud about is how this gift from the Dornsife enabled us to focus on capacity building to address sustainability with this strong focus on the perspective of women. And sustainability and success means that we must incorporate the perspectives of women, empowering women to take the leadership roles on water communities, helping them by training to deal with maintenance, understanding the role of behavior change. And as I mentioned, these efforts for women, by women. Now, in fact, I've come to Paris from Senegal from a 1 week long training capacity building program where we focused on providing the necessary skills in sanitation, hygiene, promotion, and behavior change and water supply development to NGO field workers, especially women, to collaborate with communities on successful solutions. And so as I was preparing for this, I thought, I don't want to just talk about sort of how we have collaborated to solve these challenges, but I want to also talk about the sustainability side and the work of really empowering women to work in WASH. I'm a woman who works in WASH, and many of the women in this last clip will tell you how they got engaged and what it means to them to be empowered in this way. And some of them are my students, actually.
Women and children. They are usually affected the most when there is a lack of clean water. But women also have the greatest impact. World Vision intentionally hires women into key leadership roles because women inspire and strengthen other women, building healthier, stronger communities which build a stronger world.
We must be problem solvers. Every day we are challenging. We need to have bottles there. We need to provide clean water to communities. We need to be a problem solvers. We realize that women are the ones that are affected mostly with the challenges that are found at household level. But what makes it all interesting is that we've seen women change Most of the women are actively involved in promoting water and sanitation. My name is Lucy Jubek Mungoni. I'm the WASH Programs Manager for World Vision Malawi. I am proud to see the people that I'm working with and the impact that we've made since we started the program. I feel very happy and proud to work for World Vision Mozambique WASH program because we partner with community to create these services that last. And each time that we build a bottle and I saw this water flowing and the happiness in the face of these children and the woman, I'm very, very happy and proud of what World Vision is doing. I love this job because I'm able to see the women who are able to implement WASH in the communities there. I go and chat with them as women on a one-to-one. This gives me joy as a WASH manager going out there because I think promoting hygiene in the communities gives hope to these vulnerable women out there. I have 2 children. I tell them every day that we need to save water, we need to protect our environment, and water is life. We are transforming their lives, we are transforming the world itself. For example, the girls can go to school, they can have more opportunities, the woman can run a business. We are creating capacity in our communities. Deborah Kuheka, the hydrogeologist for World Vision Malawi. I'm proud to be a strong woman. Strong women, strong world. Strong women, strong world. I believe that every child deserves clean water. I believe also that strong woman can build a strong world. Strong women, strong world.
So I simply want to leave you with a thought, because I know this is a lot. It is a lot to digest, but I want us to remember Amita's story. We can all play some role in raising awareness and working collectively to solve these global challenges and to help alleviate the burden on women. We all have a story to tell. I'm a woman who has a story to tell. I'm a woman working in WASH. I've spent my entire career working on these issues. I've studied engineering and then public health and also focused on training the next generation of leaders, the next generation of women to work on these complex challenges and alleviate the burden. And I have an obligation to use my platform and experience to address these things and to raise awareness. And so, since it's actually the year of water at Columbia, it really was quite coincidental that I was asked to give this talk because, as you can tell, I could go on and on and on about water. And so to be invited to sort of talk in a forum focused on this as a theme for the year, I hope that we can increase the dialogue and the awareness. So thank you so much. And I want to acknowledge many, many contributors to this partnership, particularly the grants received from World Vision. Also, I mentioned David and Dana Dornsife, who've been major supporters and good friends, and a number of colleagues who've also contributed and really motivated me to begin to focus on more and how we can really have projects raising the awareness of women in water. So thank you so much. Yeah, we can actually informally do it over wine and cheese, or.
I just want to say how moved I was to hear you, to see those images.
Oh.
I was very moved.
Oh, thank you. So we're not going to cry, but thank you for sharing that. It means a lot to me, and I think we're all very blessed sitting in this room, and our backgrounds and experiences are all very different. But, you know, again, oftentimes I learn so much from people I meet in the field. There are many lessons to be learned about humility, about resilience, about wellness. Thank you. Yes.
So, just recently I watched, I'm sorry to say this, but the show on Netflix called Inside Bill Gates' Brain.
Okay.
And, he talks about all of the issues that you talked about.
Mhm.
And I'm just trying to figure out what happened to that project.
Yeah. So recently I learned that they developed, I think the $200 something dollar toilet.
Right.
That is pretty much not accessible to most communities, but I think the spirit of the innovation is what's important, right? Because with the access to lower cost materials, but also in raising the awareness, you're driving young people to be engaged and partner in ways that might solve the challenge, make it more affordable. I have to say that I used to be really quite not optimistic about how we're going to address the sanitation side of the equation. It seems so overwhelming. But most recently in traveling to Southeast Asia and seeing very low cost flush toilets, also in Latin America, I realized that, Africa is actually a bit behind in this, and that also I think the solutions that have been provided have been sort of keeping them in the idea that latrines, when in fact there are innovative ways to bring toilets to communities. So I think the spirit of the projects and these grand challenges are driving innovation. It just takes several iterations.
So the whole idea, what I really love about your idea is that there are simple solutions, right? That they've complicated.
Right, absolutely.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And they could be giving their money for those simple solutions throughout the world.
Perhaps. Any other questions? Well, I'm happy to chat informally over wine and cheese. That's the beauty of all of this. But I thank you so much for your attention.